dance like a monkey. Move, 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 move like a monkey. Shoot, 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 shoot like a monkey. Kill, 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 kill like a monkey. Dance, 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 dance like a monkey. Move, 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 move like a monkey. Shoot, 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 shoot like a monkey. Kill, 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 kill like a monkey.
All right. Good evening, everybody. How are we all doing tonight? Is the sound working? Can we hear everyone? So it's been another busy week. Unfortunately, Hetman won't be able to join us tonight despite being billed. And on the thumbnail, and there it was my first mistake, was making a thumbnail with all the guests and with everyone on it because that guaranteed someone couldn't show up. He's regrettably not feeling well. So it is just me and Commander McMillian tonight. And we're here to talk about Israel attacking Iran again. I guess we should probably start with a little synopsis. At the beginning of the month of October, Iran launched a barrage of missiles at Israel in response to Israel violating the borders of Lebanon. Most of those missiles were intercepted, with the exception of a handful that hit at a air base where Israel's F-35 program is based, and a couple random ones in fields, and a couple around Tel Aviv at the military headquarters and Mossad headquarters. Israel didn't take to this well. So the other day, Friday night into Thursday, our time here on this side of the world, I think is the best way to put it, Israel launched a series of airstrikes against Iran. It's been somewhat difficult to figure out exactly what has been hit, but so far it looks like it was an operation designed in 3 distinct waves. The first wave was to destroy the air defense systems that Iran has set up, and 2 additional waves to target missile launching facilities and drone and missile production facilities, as best as we can tell. That sounds like a good summary, Commander?
Yeah.
Yeah. This has been a very slow-moving situation, right, between Iran and Israel throughout the past year. We talked about this a little before Israel bombed a Iranian embassy, which they claimed contained a Republican Guard commander, which is a international no-no, regardless of who's inside the embassy. And Iran eventually, sort of after a while and sufficient warning, launched a barrage of missiles. This was in April, I think. It's been a long year. Towards Israel, and basically the United States and the Middle East teamed up to help Israel shoot most of them down. And like the length of time was a couple weeks between the inciting incident and the response. And this time was a little shorter. The inciting incident
But
occurred.
It's even weirder than that. It's like both sides are telegraphing their intentions and their moves before they execute them.
Yes.
So make these big statements about, we're going to do this to you. And then a week or two later, they do that to them. It's really strange.
I have a sneaking suspicion. One of the things that we did prior to this is we deployed a weapon system called a THAAD battery to Israel. And there are like 8 of these in existence. They are a really effective anti-missile system. I have a feeling that we basically told Israel, this is the things that you must do in order to maintain our support in this effort. And it was designed around not necessarily provoking Iran too much. I have a sneaking suspicion that there's a Russian saying something similar to the Iranians on the other side.
Yeah.
So there's kind of this thing. The other thing I've noticed, and I've had a couple conversations with people, is I'm really surprised by how much restraint Iran is showing. Like, they have kind of been the more restrained party in all of this, to a certain degree.
Yeah. But I would agree with you. I think when you consider all the rhetoric that both sides fling at each other, and the history of various actions against one another. It's another one of the curiosities of this basically past year of operations between these two countries that stands out is that the Iranians are, other than, authorizing and backing the Hamas raids on, what was it?
October 7th.
Yeah, October 7th. And, and the cross-border shooting by Hezbollah from Lebanon. Other than doing that, and let's be honest, the Hezbollah shooting across the border into northern Israel it's like, oh, it's Tuesday, they're going to shoot again. It's so common. Other than that, there's really very little that the Iranians have done. Now, whether that's because they don't have the infrastructure in place to do it, or they're just holding back, I can't tell you.
I don't know if it's that they don't have the infrastructure, because it's in April when the first barrage of missiles going out, you got a whole bunch of smug people going, yes, Iran is now out of missiles, ha 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 ha.
Oh.
and that happened again this time too. I saw a whole bunch of people on Twitter where I still descended to the bowels of Twitter for you people to see what people are saying. I saw a whole bunch of people going, Iran's going to fall any day now. They're out of weapons. It's over. It's so over for Iran. I'm like, I don't think so. You might be counting your chickens before they hatch there.
It's like saying the U.S. ran out of generic beer.
Yeah, we're never going to run out of generic beer, but still.
Exactly.
It's and like Mike Pompeo, former Secretary of State to Donald Trump, is one of these people going, yeah, this is so ridiculous that Biden let Iran build a nuclear or a ballistic missile program in 4 years. And I'm like, do you really think they managed to get stand up a ballistic missile program in just the last 4 years, and it wasn't available to them for decades already? What is happening?
They had a program going
in the Iran-Iraq war.
Back in the late 70s, for God's sake.
I don't understand. Elections. One of the reasons we haven't been around that much is that election season has been depressing me, because it has absolutely descended into Looney Tunes territory.
That's a really rude thing to say about loony people.
Yes, it's very reductive. I apologize. Still, like this kind of rhetoric that has kind of amplified this past year around Israel and Iran is weird. Like I was telling you before we went on air, I was checking out various news sites on this, and BBC does their stuff, and they're usually pretty good. But they had this blurb, why are Iran and Israel fighting? And it was all this stuff about like Iran wants to destroy Israel and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it was nothing like really about a fairly interesting like set of evolution. Like Israel starts to make peace with the countries around it, like Jordan. They negotiate with Syria, and they have a border negotiations with Syria and Palestine. And then the Intifada happens, the second Intifada, and that's when the Iranians kind of really step up, right?
Yeah.
Into this gap that's kind of being created by this pulling back of the conflict around Israel from other countries. And like the reason isn't because they suddenly decided that enough is enough and we're going to kill all the Jews. The reason has a lot to do with the fact that Iran has recognized that it has had space to recover from the 80s and the oil tanker wars and whatnot, and they want to become a regional power again. And they have a availability in the vacuum created by the fall of Iraq that has happened to this day. The conflict is not one of anti-Semitism in any like meaningful sense, the way that it's described. It's a conflict of who wants to be the powerhouse in the Middle East, Israel or Iran. It's a conflict over who wants to be the regional hegemon. And the fact that we don't...
I think part of that is because if you look at Second Intifada, it's right about the same time that Iraq ceases being a dominant power in the region. Even after Desert Storm, they were still a very large military and they flex their muscles a lot.
Yes.
But once we go in and break that and don't really set up anything to replace the Ba'athist regime, they suddenly see that they can contend for a regional hegemon to an extent. So they start pushing their own agenda. And you also see, if you dig deep, there's also spikes in the violence in Saudi Arabia at the same time, which is a Sunni Shia game being played there.
Yeah,
and of course, Iran is part of that because they're Shia.
I was just about to say Iran, Saudi Arabia also gets involved in that. For example, kind of one good example is how they fueled the conflict in Yemen at the same time too. Like understanding that dynamic is something that is kind of vital to coming up with good policy in regards to the Middle East, and it's something we haven't done. And it's a sorry, go ahead.
My dog's being annoying.
Yeah, mine's about to come back and yell. It's a really difficult thing to kind of explain to people because they get wrapped up in this existential conflict type thing, and that's just not what's happening. So the first thing I think that we can say for sure is that this is not going to cause Tehran to fall. There are people getting up and saying that on Twitter, and that's just not really the case.
In fact, arguably, it will help bolster the regime.
It does.
Because suddenly you have an external hostile nation attacking, and that helps unify and get people behind the regime to defend the homeland.
Yeah, and there's this particular feeling that people have, especially Iranian expatriates who are like very pro-Israel taking out Iran at the very least. And I don't seem to see that reflected in internal Iranian discourse. So it's like two very different conversations are happening in those communities there around how this works. But by and large, most people in the Middle East aren't really enthused with the concept of either the Iranian government or the Israeli government being dominant. It's just not good for them.
Yeah, I agree with that assessment. I think most of the Arab states have gotten to the point where they tolerate, not accept, but tolerate Israel being there. And I think Saudi Arabia is hoping that somehow it will emerge as, one of the regional leaders because they control the holy places and so forth. But the reality is they've got so many internal problems and issues, and their population is way too small to become dominant. But they have a hell of a lot of money, so they can, hire Americans to do their dirty work.
Yes. It's unlikely, like I said, to collapse Iran. It is very likely to fuel conflict. Like the United Kingdom got up and they said Iran shouldn't respond, and Biden got up and said Iran shouldn't respond, and Iran was like, screw that, we're going to respond when we're ready. So like I think this kind of like thing, it's a very slow ping pong match almost, is going to continue for the time being. Because Iran is kind of in a place where they can't not respond. They have to do something.
Yeah, I think Iran needs to do something after this, but the question is, what can they do? Given the presence of Patriot and THAAD and Iron Dome, trying to hit Israel with missiles fired from Iran is kind of an exercise in futility.
It is, but it's also a statement more than it's anything, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
It's why didn't you would ask the question, why wasn't there a massive barrage out of Lebanon into Israel in response to the embassy attack? And the reason is it couldn't be one of their proxies. It had to be them. They had to be the ones to do the talking, so to speak. And that was the same thing here, is why you violated Hezbollah. The response needs to come from Iran as a ally of Hezbollah. They have to decide to do something. And there is a caveat to this. Is a couple weeks ago, there was a earthquake, a little earthquake in Iran. And Iran is tectonically active to start with, obviously. But this one was speculated to be about the right size for a underground nuclear test. I don't necessarily think that Iran is far from a nuclear weapon. They probably have one already. It's probably the case. After Trump killed the nuclear deal, that basically became inevitable.
Oh, I'm sure they went hard over to get the program back online and go as fast as you can.
And I bet you any money that part of the deal for those Shahed drones for Russia was nuclear assistance.
Yeah.
I'm almost positive. I bet you all the money in my pockets against all the money in your pockets.
Yeah, no, I believe you.
Do I think they're going to use it? Probably not. It would be an unacceptable risk. But I think they might...
Particularly because Israel could retaliate.
Yes. I do think they might say they have it. And that would be significant. Israel would blow a gasket, but be kind of stuck.
Yeah, I think that's true, because at that point you kind of end up in the same sort of situation we were with the USSR back in the Cold War. I can't use because then you'd retaliate, sort of situation.
And it ends Israel's trump card. Israel's secret nuclear program absolutely is very much its trump card.
Yeah, secret in quotes.
yes, it's a secret, but everyone knows. Don't tell Dad. Mommy smokes in the car, but Jesus said it's okay. Don't tell Dad. Type situation. The other one is Egypt's secret, quote unquote, chemical weapons program. Does kind of the same thing. Basically, everyone has a nasty gun pointed at each other's head there, and the more nasty guns, the more problematic it gets. And like me and Hetman talked about this last week when Zelensky got up and said, we either need to join NATO or we need to get nukes. I'm like, the end result of not properly opposing Russia is a lot of countries are going to start looking for nukes because security guarantees aren't going to mean anything, which is something we should probably avoid, I think. It's a bad idea.
I agree.
The other half of this particular equation is I think I'm going to say the thing, and I know it's going to sound different than everything I say in the year, and I'm going to add a caveat to it. It looks as if this was probably orchestrated heavily by the United States government, and for once, Israel kind of colored within the lines. So they attacked military targets like radar dishes for S-300, 400 sites, and they attacked...
And our old IHawks that they stole.
Yeah, and they attacked factories and whatnot. But they did those things at, like, for example, the timing of it was dead of night in Iran. So, like, there wouldn't be a lot of civilians on duty. It was very limited. They used...
The Iranian government has said that there were only 4 casualties.
Yes.
And we consider the amount of ordnance that was dumped. That speaks volumes.
In 3 waves and an estimated 200 sorties. So it was a very precisely and well done, right? Which suggests to me that someone at CENTCOM was sitting on Israel like a hawk, watching them very carefully, make sure they obeyed the rules this time. It was about as professional as we've seen them engage in this past year, to be perfectly frank, as far as we can tell. And that might not be the case. We don't know everything yet. It's kind of murky. But so far, it doesn't look like it was the same kind of normal slaughter you see from the IDF.
Yeah. One of the things that I thought was interesting when I was researching prep for this show, I ran across a couple of articles that implied but didn't overtly state that the U.S. had basically told Israel not to hit Iranian nuclear facilities or research facilities. And I think that may be
I think
true, because that would seem to me to be a logical target. But if they didn't hit it, then I think it's because they were told, we would prefer that you not do that.
I think there's two halves to that problem. I think the first problem is that the ship has sailed on keeping Iran from getting a nuke is the first problem. And I suspect that we are aware of this. Like the usual suspects were very quiet when that earthquake went off. And the other half of it is that kind of escalation would necessitate a much more powerful Iranian response.
Yeah.
A kind of gloves off thing. And also I think the concern was for American positions in places like Jordan and Iraq, which if kind of detente between the Iranian militias and the America's forces. So the other thing I think is that our giving them the THAAD battery had a number of contingent conditions on it. One of them probably being don't target oil facilities, don't target
well, that was the other
facilities.
Part, like the article on that said oil and nuke. Those were the two that we told them not to do.
The other half of it is I haven't talked much about this because it's been hard to get information out of southern Lebanon. Obviously, Beirut is a different story. For example, the Israelis said, "Oh, this hospital in Beirut is actually a secret Hezbollah bank." And because Israel doesn't control media access to Beirut in the same way they do to Gaza, the Lebanese let in a whole bunch of reporters. 30 reporters scoured the hospital for a couple days and found no evidence of $500,000 in gold anywhere. It would have been funny if it wasn't, horrifying. But like the reports coming out of southern Lebanon are bad. The Israeli actions haven't been limited to Hezbollah loyal regions. They've been detonating Christian and other villages that aren't loyal too, like clearing out the residents, going in and blowing them up. It's a repeat of what happened in Gaza over the past year.
Yeah.
It's already a kind of difficult situation, and there isn't a whole lot of options that Iran has. The first problem that both Israel and Iran have is they don't really have expeditionary militaries in the way the United States does, where we can, deploy a Burger King anywhere in the world 24 hours. Pizza in the middle of the desert, that sort of thing.
I've seen the video.
Yeah. The both sides. So, like, for example, the strikes that the Israelis launched probably stretched their tanker assets to the limit to get all the way from Israel to Iran and back again. I wouldn't also be terribly surprised if there were some American tankers mixed in there as well.
Don't say that.
Yeah. We probably shouldn't mention that. That's a no-no. Hi, Bubba. You're a good boy. Yes. Go lay down.
I think the issue is that Israel wants to secure both the Gaza and Lebanon borders, so these kind of attacks become, if not impossible, certainly more difficult for Hamas and Hezbollah or whoever to mount. I think the strike against Iran is kind of the flip side of the record you mentioned earlier. The Iranians felt compelled to do this to show that they're not weak, and I think Israel kind of was in the same predicament.
Yeah, there's
that Israel has the ability to deliver a much more meaningful spanking.
I have been having interesting conversations with a Pentagon colonel who focuses on this too, and they have some thoughts that I thought were interesting. there is a political conflict between the far right of Likud and the far, far, far right that make up the rest of Netanyahu's government, who aren't that different from Likud, really, when you get down to it, but they say the quiet part out loud. So there's also like clamoring for settling Gaza again and annexing the West Bank. And there are even crazier people who want to go back into the Sinai and take Lebanon and push out this dream of greater Israel that goes from, here to Babylon type crap. And that's kind of happening a little bit in the open and behind the scenes. The ceasefire talks have resumed today also. Egypt proposed 2 days and 4-for-4 hostage swap. I highly doubt Israel's going to accept. They're not going to be able to blame it on Sinwar anymore, obviously, because he's dead. But it's a problem now for Israel too, because they were kind of successful at getting the English-speaking world to think that Sinwar was the problem, when in reality Netanyahu was most of the problem in this case, and his particularly at his far right flank.
Well, Netanyahu is in a weird situation where, because of all the charges pending against him and the fact that he can't be prosecuted until he's out of office, it's in his interest to keep conflict going so that he can effectively use that and martial law to prevent elections and throw him out.
Yeah, although it's worth noting that right now the polls have him getting at least enough to build a coalition in an election. The other half, and there's a mounting issue there that probably won't last forever. But it's like a kind of twisted thing, because Israel actually isn't as in danger as they claim they are. Like you see Elon Levi, the disgraced former spokesperson for Israel, going, "We're in a 7-front war." Like, first of all, that's not geographically possible at this time. Second of all, actually, we're in a 7-front war, you'd be in trouble. They can do what they're doing largely with impunity at the moment, because there isn't really a force that's going to stop them. That's like the only viable option really is Egypt, and they're not interested in doing that. So
Egypt's realized that this is a mess they don't want to put their foot in again.
The real irony of the Houthis in Yemen and their missile attacks is it actually affects Egypt more than it affects anyone, because they're so incredibly dependent on revenue from the Suez Canal, which has caused them to have economic issues and revenue stream issues going forward. So,
and that's one of the things that surprises me. A lot of people forget that before the 67 war, one of the reasons it was delayed as long as it was is because the Egyptians had almost 2 full divisions in Yemen fighting the rebels in that area. This back, way back in time.
Yeah.
And I'm still wondering why Egypt hasn't work with the Saudis to send troops in to put down the Houthis.
That's I don't know, but I have noticed in the last couple weeks they are increasingly moving into other border areas to try to stabilize them on their direct borders. Mm-hmm. So I think they have more concerns coming out of the eastern coastal area of Africa than they do for the moment. They're a lot more concerned about that than they are about Israel.
Yeah.
And I can see why, there's a very much a seesaw going on in a lot of those countries, Somalia, Kenya, etc., between rebels and government forces in all of them. And Somalia obviously has long been a hotbed of problems even beyond the 90s, and indeed the whole Black Hawk Down story. Battle of Mogadishu, excuse me.
Someday I'll have to tell you about my involvement.
That would actually be. It has always been a particular side note. I don't know if you remember back in the early aughts, 90s, there was a company called Nova Logic, and they did some of the first tactical shooters, and one of them was basically Black Hawk Down, which they're redoing and relaunching, I think, next year.
Yeah.
It's going to be, there's going to be also Sea Power comes out next month on the 12th. That trailer I showed you. So I'm gonna probably stream it. You should come and chat and tell me everything I'm doing wrong. I was taught ground warfare. Yeah. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was going to say the situation. I suspect you were right when you said earlier. Yeah, at some point now the Iranians are going to have to retaliate, and that means the Israelis will have to retaliate again, and it will go back and forth. But I think it's going to be more measured. I think both sides are realizing this is something that could get dangerously out of control, but they still need to do it for their own, national prestige. So
yeah,
I think we're going to see more of the same, basically.
Yeah. It's particularly for the price of loitering munition drones that Iran has developed. I think they can afford to engage in those kind of futile attacks that Israel will intercept en masse.
Yeah.
They're small. They're easy to launch. Obviously, as the Ukrainians have found out to their detriment, they're kind of difficult to deal with. They're stupid cheap. It's not necessarily the same level of investment that it would have been 10, 20 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
As for
some sort of improved Scud that had the range.
Yeah, and
that's kind of expensive.
The Scuds were pretty expensive, if I recall.
Oh, yeah, at the time.
For example, Iraq dropped a bunch of Scuds on Saudi Arabia and Israel in the opening of the 91 Gulf War. As soon as they figured out the great bamboozle we had pulled on them was actually the attack, they started launching missiles. So, it's an old repeating habit, and I wouldn't necessarily go and pay much attention to the people who are dooming and glooming about it being the next great battle. Obviously, the election is basically going to be decided by a series of 5 coin flips when you take into account the battleground states. And once that happens and January rolls around and we see what happens, maybe there's more cause for alarm. If Harris wins, we're probably okay. If Trump wins, we're in serious trouble.
Concur.
And
I think basically
both domestically and internationally.
Oh, yeah, but I think at this point, the whole world is holding its breath to see what happens, which will decide their route forward.
Yes. This has been a long election here in the United States, and it feels to me like it has been especially impactful for other countries in a certain sense. They didn't like Trump in Europe. They don't like Trump in the Middle East. They love Trump in North Korea, Russia, and China, but that's another problem entirely.
Yeah.
Everyone is kind of waiting. They have 2 particular problems, I think. The first is we have kind of started to pull back from directly supporting Ukraine, and it's showing. And basically, there's a slow push happening where everywhere Ukraine is basically getting pushed back. They're not getting the support they really need. There's no indication they're going to get the support, and people are taking that as an indicative of the United States commitments overall. Somebody has to go fix that, probably.
Yeah, I think that is linked directly to the election.
Yes.
And I think after the election, assuming Harris wins, that will change.
Yeah, I don't know.
Of course, it
Obviously,
changes in the other extreme if Trump wins. So.
yes. If the other extreme, then get out of Ukraine, folks. But I don't necessarily know if Harris. Like, I have a sneaking suspicion that Harris is gonna probably not keep Blinken, because he's kind of a tool, and that will kind of determine where we land from there. If she gets rid of Blinken, we're probably okay. If not, Blinken has just been kind of disastrous as Secretary of State all around. In my opinion, he's not been great. And that might have an effect on Israel. Like, you see headlines: Biden complains about Netanyahu not listening to Biden. It's like, okay, maybe you should do something about that. And this is going to be the one time I ever endorse it on stream, but the Israeli lobby by damn it, what's his name? The IR guy that's wrong on everything else. Yeah. Normally I'd remember his Mershmeimer. John Mershmeimer. That's probably a really good primer for the relationship between the United States and Israel. It's very much a tail wagging the dog relationship. Biden probably could afford, because he's not going to be reelected, to be harsher on Israel if he didn't want to torch Kamala Harris's chance of winning. If she wins on November, he might crack down on Israel in the intervening months too. That's a possibility. Maybe. We'll see. Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
He suddenly has no reason not to. And it would be beneficial if she wins for him to do so, because it will create an environment in which she'll have a much easier time getting compliance out of the Israeli government.
Yes, very true. Very true.
When you have that kind of party-to-party transition phase, you have opportunities to kind of play countries off of the president and the president-elect. That's really useful in situations like this.
Mm-hmm. And we know that the two of them have a pretty good working relationship, so I'm sure that there will be some cross-channel talking between them about how she'd like to see him do certain things during this lame duck period.
Yeah, especially if the projections for the House and Senate turn out to be accurate and we Democrats don't have control. She's going to have to sell foreign policy really hard to prove her presidency.
Yeah.
So, and I have no reason to assume that they won't be, because those are pretty much set in stone as heavily Republican weighted.
Yeah. It's going to be hard to last the next 2 weeks.
I'm having a breakdown, slowly but surely.
Yeah, you and me both.
With that, I don't really think we have anything else pertinent to add. We've kind of covered all the actual coverable ground here.
Well, I just wanted to, for people who might be interested, it sounds like the way the strike was conducted was interesting in that they used F-35s to go in front because their low detectable stealth technology meant that the Iranians couldn't see them. They got in range to launch long-range PGMs, which took out air defenses, and then F-15E Strike Eagles for the next waves that released the ordnance at the other targets. And that's pretty sophisticated planning when you think about it. I mean, considering the distance they had to fly, And the fact that they had to also be worried about coordinating with the countries whose airspace those strikes were flying over.
Yeah, there's a complicated bit of logistics there that they is something that they would have to get help from someone who has some experience in it. It's us.
Who
It's
would
us.
that be?
It's
I have to
us.
think about that.
So yeah, accepting that. This Friday at around 7 Mountain Time, I am hosting another panel. A number of individuals, some of whom you met before on our last panel, a couple who are new, to talk about the election and last minute thoughts, because it basically is we're there at that point. It's close enough for government work. Then we go on. Probably tomorrow I'll be back to talk about the Twitch being secretly anti-Semitic conspiracy theory and why it's ridiculous and why the people who are advancing it are full of crap. So that'll be fun. And then on the 3rd, I will be joining Maya Atkinson and Dr. Tapioca Weasel to talk about Nazis and Bad Science Sunday, which will actually be going live shortly here. If it hasn't already, I haven't got the notification, which is weird. Still, I will put up announcements for all of those things as they happen. As for the rest of you, I want to thank you for coming out. Hope you have a good evening, and I want to take up too much of your time. Have a good night.
Take care.